Hello world, it's a boiling hot day, it's lovely sunshine and everything, but it's all rather pink in here. Anyway, I'm here to talk about some of my new Beatles cassettes that I've bought.
Well, hello world.
33, 45, spin those records round. 33, 45.
All the best in hi-fi reviews.
Spin those records round.
Stick to me for the best advice.
Stick to me for the best advice.
Hello world. Feeling like some photography?
Photography 101.
Hello world.
33, 45.
You're with me, Marky Muzz.
Or Marky P, or Bad Boy Marky, or just plain Mark. Right, well, hopefully this won't be too long a video. I'm starting a cassette collection from scratch, okay? So my Beatles collection here is not very many tapes, but they're all interesting in their own way. So let's start. Okay, number one, A Hard Day's Night. This is a gold edition. The gold editions came onto the scene round about 1973 and lasted up until 1987 when they were replaced with new editions to coincide with the launch on CD. Right, this is a stereo mix. Okay, when it was reissued in 1987, it was only ever issued in mono on CD, vinyl and cassette. So the only place where you can get a stereo mix of A Hard Day's Night is to go back to these older cassettes here. Okay, this one plays reasonably well. Okay, it's actually one of the later 80s versions. We know this because it's got Dolby on it. Okay, Dolby started appearing on Beatles cassettes in 1973. I think 1973. Magical Mystery Tour was released on cassette in 1973, 3 years before it was released on vinyl, which is why the mixes on there are more modern, as it were, mixes of things like Strawberry Fields and Penny Lane, which got new stereo mixes in 1971. So in 1973, when they released the cassette of Magical Mystery Tour, it had the newer versions on there. The vinyl was just a copy of the American edition that was released in 1967. So it's got the older American fake stereo mixes of some of the songs on there. But anyway, this is off the point, but never mind. Okay, so yeah, we know this is it's a Dolby cassette. It's also printed in a sort of dark browny, kind of almost going on grey black sort of colour here, which means it was one of the last of the breed to be issued. Okay, next I've got Beatles for Sale. Now this is a first edition cassette. Okay, we know this because it has a paper label like so. It has no Dolby. Okay, now this is not the only Beatles cassette that I've got with no Dolby. Okay, and people might be thinking, oh well, the sound quality is going to be rubbish. Well, it actually, to be fair, isn't. And I would defy anyone to play this on a decent cassette deck, such as my Yamaha KX580, and spot the hiss, because you can't. Okay, but you do have to remember to switch the Dolby off, otherwise the treble will sound rather dull, because Dolby on playback reduces the treble content because it's boosted it when it's been recorded. All right, and the treble content is just about right as well on here. I think they possibly had to do a little bit of extra hard limiting and stuff to get a nice powerful sound on there, but people assume wrongly, I believe, that before Dolby cassettes were awful, and I don't believe they were. By the time we're sort of approaching the 70s, cassettes were kind of coming into what would have then been considered hi-fi. So, you know, they did their best you know, even though these mechanisms are rather rubbish. This one plays okay most of the time. I've given it a few plays now, and I've also fast forward and rewound it several times, and it just about manages to play with no kind of slowing down and speeding up. And I think it's probably because the tape layers, this spool here, if they just lie dormant for years, then the layers start to stick together on the spool, and they don't sort of get wound onto the take-up spool evenly. Okay, so yeah, it's something to watch out for. I've had a few tapes out of the ones that I've bought here that have been unrescuable, but this one here I can just about get to play properly. And what I might do is actually do a tape transfer onto disc, because I've never had a stereo mix of this, and what it would be nice to do is do a tape transfer onto my hard drive and then put the songs in the right order, because all of these came in the wrong order. Okay, for example, let's move on to the next tape, which is came in the same batch. I bought this one and this one from the same eBay seller. Okay, this is Help. Okay, track 1, I Need You. Anybody? No. Apparently, the reason is this, okay, and I got this from a website which I'll put a link to in the description, but Andy Hall also got me onto this website. The reason why all of these tapes have the songs in the wrong order is because when they first made tape issues of these, they weren't on cassette at all. They were on 8-track cartridge. Okay, now 8-track cartridge has to have a play time that is exactly equal because of just the way that it all works. Okay, and they didn't bother to remake the masters for cassette when they did it, so they know that actually 2 of those 8-track sessions will fit on one side of a cassette, and they will be exactly the same length on the other side. Okay, EMI for some reason were rather bothered that people did not know where the fast forward and rewind buttons were on their tape decks, and so they were worried that if they put these in the right order, the songs might be slightly of different length on each side, and so when you got to the end of side 1, you might have maybe a minute, 2 minutes to wait, and people wouldn't actually have the patience to rewind at the beginning of side 2 to play the next side. So even, you know, on cassette, rewinding takes seconds of your life. Okay, and if you can't spare a few seconds of your life to rewind a tape, then there's something seriously wrong here. Okay, what they started to do was say, to make a convenient break in the program, the sides may be of unequal length, please spool to the end of the tape before turning over to the other side, because people were just turning over and finding themselves in the middle of track 1, according to EMI, who obviously didn't have a high regard for the intelligence of their customers. So yeah, so that's, again, this one here, this Help thing here, it's a 80s issue here, and again it plays reasonably well. Okay, there's some I think, no, it's a Hard Day's Night, there's some evidence that it may have been chewed at some point, but it kind of gets over that bit. Okay, right, the next one is the prize, or one of the prizes of my collection. This is an original 1967 copy of the Beatles' Sgt. Pepper's Lonely Hearts Club Band. Okay, they're not that easy to find, but I found one on eBay that was going for a reasonable amount of money, and one I think that was going for an extortionate amount of money, just because it was Sgt. Pepper's Lonely Hearts Club Band. Okay, again, now this was released at the time of the original album release. Okay, 1967. we know this because there are only 2 cassettes that have ever been released by the Beatles up until 1987 at any rate. There are only 2 cassettes, Sgt. Pepper and Abbey Road, that were released at the same time as the album, or near enough at the same time as the album. There may have been a couple of months in it or whatever, but we also have some artwork in there. Okay, it's a pretty poor attempt at artwork, but it is artwork nonetheless. Okay, it's not a brilliant reproduction of the cover, but then again, none of them are. Okay, and this I don't believe has any real resemblance to the Sgt. Pepper artwork anyway, apart from these with the faces that appeared in the cutout, but they're black and white versions. Here we have the track listings. Okay, we have a sold in the UK, subject to resale price conditions, see price list. That disappeared towards the middle of 1969, so no other cassettes will have that sold in the UK text on there. Okay, again, Dolby at this time hadn't been invented, and so it had to be done with no Dolby, a little bit of compression and limiting. This plays okay on side 1. On side 2, for some reason, there seems to be a huge discrepancy between the volume levels of the left and right channels, which means that songs like When I'm 64, where the vocals are more to the right, seem to be very dull and barely audible, and on the left you've got a full output, so it sounds a bit weird, but it's playable. Okay, and I have played it through twice now. Okay, I've only had it a few days, and I was actually surprised that it played as well as it did. Okay, so that's actually really something to have. Okay, and side 1, to be fair on it, sounds fine, sounds really good. Okay, the next one that I'm actually really proud of having is a copy of the White Album. Again, this is a 1972 issue, something like that, because we know that, again, a paper label with no Dolby on there. And again, this album plays absolutely superbly and is absolutely brilliant, sounds fantastic, the quality is excellent. You may have to turn it up a little bit. You may find that perhaps there's, as with all of these cassettes really, that there's a lot of attention being paid to the mid-range frequencies and not very much real bass. Okay, and the treble, if you're gonna nitpick, the treble is nowhere near as controlled as my RP8 playing these albums, but nevertheless, this is absolutely stunning. Okay, and yes, the songs have all been muddled up. They're not too bad on side 1, except quite why we have long on the end of side 1, I don't know. Okay, well, I do know why. It's for the reasons that I've said regarding these 8-track cartridges that had to have 4 equal lengths of tape, and then not bothering to remaster them for cassette. Okay, it ends with Revolution 9, which, as I've said in my White Album review, is absolutely totally wrong. Okay, it really shouldn't. We've got Good Night somewhere in the middle of side 2, which is really in the wrong place. So yeah, I think with these things, yeah, when the tapes work, the sound quality is good, it's okay, but it is such a shame that they had to muddle around with the order of the songs. Okay, when this was released in 1987, it was given, was it 1987, possibly 1988 maybe, but it was given 2 cassettes, a sort of a double cassette holder, a bit like, pretend it's like that sort of thing, so that one door opens like that and one door opens like that. which again is marginally better provided that the mechanisms are good, and I'm afraid that I haven't found a single XDR cassette, which is what the technology that EMI were using at the time, but I've never found a single XDR cassette that's lasted, to be honest. But you have to be just a bit careful with these double play tapes, and the reason is that as I said in my mixtape thing, if the cassettes, if the tape is too long on a spool, and you can see that this clearly is, okay, it's going to be thinner to fit inside the case. It's going to be more likely to chew and to break. But this one has been kept beautifully. It's obviously been played on something half decent, and it's in absolutely perfect working order. It's absolutely great. Okay, so I'm really, really pleased with that buy. Finally, in the same batch as Help and A Hard Day's Night, there was a copy of the Beatles 20 Greatest Hits. Now, the Beatles 20 Greatest Hits is not my favourite Beatles compilation, but nevertheless, it's a Beatles compilation. And, you know, if you're getting Help and A Hard Day's Night, and I think I paid £4 for all three of them, then, you know, you can accept that you're going to get something that perhaps you don't want quite as much as the other two. So I've got a copy of the Beatles 20 Greatest Hits here. Okay, now let me take you back to Tuesdays and Saturdays at Clacton Market. Okay, now every week there used to be the same piraters that used to come along and flog substandard tapes, and this may not have been purchased at Clacton Market, but it certainly is a pirated tape. How do we know this? We have Pyramid Records here. Pyramid Records? Anyone heard of them? Really? Here's the inlay card. Okay. Here's the track listing on the back. No copyright information. This has all the songwriting credits here, so this is side 1. Normally you would have side 2 here. Where is it? No writing at all apart from 20 Greatest Hits, the Beatles. See inlay card for details. And this bizarre Pyramid Records thing. I wouldn't normally do this. I'm sure that this won't get picked up by copyright bods. But let me just take Marla out of there. Let me just play you a wee bit. Oh, sorry, I've turned my deck off with my knee. I haven't got room for this on my hi-fi rack, so I'm having to have it underneath here. Turn it over to side 2. This counts as fair use anyway, it's a review. Oh, it's Hey Jude. Gang, there is such a thing as bootlegging, and there is such a thing as piracy. The difference between bootlegging is that both are stealing, okay? Both, in a sense, are issuing substandard material because there wouldn't necessarily be the same quality output that the group in question would be wanting to put out, okay? But bootlegging tends to be material that for some reason has developed some sort of interest. For example, prior to the CD release of ABBA's Live in Concert, there was a lot of interest in ABBA Live material, and so quite a lot of people released bootlegs, either things that have been broadcast on the radio, or people have been carrying mini cassette machines in their pocket and recording it on the sly and sending it out, and copying that and sending it out. It's stealing. It's not their work, okay? Pirating is essentially taking a copy of an album from somewhere or other and passing it off as the real thing when it quite clearly isn't. This is fit for the bin. It really is, okay? I only kept it to show you here on YouTube, okay? Now, the Beatles, from, you know, and again, I am going back, this was released in 1982 originally, so I'm going back to when I was about 14 here, and much as I used to go and scour that market, because occasionally you come up with a cassette that was maybe a foreign issue or something like that. I've managed to get some sort of foreign Polydor issues and things like that from there, but this 20 greatest hits and the 1962 to 1966, i.e. the Red album, seem to be the only Beatles ones that I could ever find that were at these pirated market stalls, okay? And again, I had a few copies of that 1962 to 66 from there, and I never found one that didn't have, on side 2 particularly, a completely absent right-hand channel. So you'd have songs like Day Tripper, which sounded like they were recorded in the bottom of a cellar somewhere with a huge amount of reverb on them, because basically you should have been hearing the vocals in the right hand channel and they weren't there, okay? So buy cheap, buy twice. This, I promise you, will be going into the bin as soon as I finish this video. I thank you.